Imagine walking through a Roman garden and being blamed for turning the wine sour, killing the bees, and rusting the farmer's tools, just because you're on your period. Sounds insane, right? A respected Roman scholar wrote that down as scientific fact. And that's just the beginning of one of the strangest, most overlooked stories in human history. Half the human population has bled monthly since the dawn of our species. Yet historians will spend chapters on ancient road building and almost nothing on how women actually managed their bodies while living full lives. Today, we're correcting that. Egypt, Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, China, the Aztec Empire. We're covering all of it, including the wildest things men once believed about menstrual blood. Let's start with Egypt, because Egypt was ahead of the curve. The Ebers Papyrus, a medical text from around 1550 BCE, documents gynecological conditions in real detail. Historians believe Egyptian women used softened papyrus and possibly rolled linen as absorbent material, both cheap, both accessible, both practical. Culturally, Egypt treated menstruation as connected to fertility and to the goddess Isis, even linking it symbolically to the flooding of the Nile. Women weren't isolated or shamed. They kept living normally. Compare that to what came next, and Egypt starts looking like the most progressive civilization on this list. Ancient Greece gave us democracy, philosophy, and Aristotle's theory that menstrual blood was essentially failed semen, produced because women's bodies were, in his words, too cold and weak to make the real thing. This wasn't some fringe idea. It was mainstream science for centuries, and it became the intellectual foundation for treating women as biologically inferior. Meanwhile, real Greek women were using wool, soft, absorbent, everywhere in a wool farming society, fashioned into small pads or plugs, arguably the earliest tampons. Fabric belts held everything in place, and ironically, Hippocrates treated menstruation as a normal health marker, not a curse. Brilliant medicine and baffling philosophy, existing side by side. If ancient history like this fascinates you, subscribing means you won't miss the deep dives we're dropping every week. Now Rome, the empire that engineered aqueducts, also produced Pliny the Elder, who confidently claimed menstruating women could kill crops, dull blades, curdle wine, drive dogs mad, and even repel hailstorms. Somehow, Rome also thought this made them capable of stopping tornadoes, a superpower nobody asked for. In reality, Roman women used soft cloth, wool, and sea sponges, naturally absorbent and reusable after washing. Wealthy women had access to fine linen and household help. Poor women made do with rough rags. That wealth gap in menstrual care wasn't unique to Rome. It shows up in nearly every civilization we're about to cover. Across the ancient world, religious and cultural law shaped menstruation more than any material ever did. In Jewish law, a menstruating woman was ritually impure and required purification rituals before resuming normal life. Hindu texts warned men who slept with menstruating women would lose their strength and wisdom. Zoroastrian tradition isolated women entirely from fire, water, and earth. And across many indigenous cultures worldwide, women temporarily lived in separate moon lodges, sometimes framed as impurity, sometimes as a period of elevated spiritual power. The materials women used stayed remarkably consistent: cloth, soft leaves, natural fibers. What changed dramatically was how much freedom they were allowed while using them. Fast forward to medieval Europe, where most peasant women likely practiced what we'd now call free bleeding, thick wool skirts and dark fabric doing the concealing. Wealthier women used washable linen or wool rags secured with a belt. Medieval medicine, borrowing from Galen, actually treated menstruation as the body's way of purging excess blood, so doctors worried when periods stopped, prescribing herbs to bring them back. Parsley, pennyroyal, tansy, an entire category of plants called emmenagogues, some of which genuinely do stimulate uterine activity. Traditional Chinese medicine took a completely different approach. Rather than framing women as broken versions of men, Han Dynasty texts treated menstrual cycles, timing, color, flow, as vital diagnostic tools for overall health. Women used cloth pads made of silk or cotton depending on class, secured with woven belts. By the Tang Dynasty, some undergarments even had built-in fabric pouches, essentially early reusable pads. In the Americas, colonization erased much of the record. but surviving evidence suggests Aztec women used fibers from the Maguey plant, the same plant behind agave and tequila, as absorbent material. In many indigenous North American traditions, the moon lodge wasn't a punishment. Women often returned from it with elevated status, seen as spiritually powerful rather than impure. Here's the twist that surprises almost everyone. The disposable pad most of us imagine as timeless. It didn't exist until 1888, when Johnson & Johnson launched Lister's towels. It flopped. Women were too embarrassed to buy them from male pharmacists. It wasn't until 1921, when Kotex reframed pads as basic hygiene rather than an embarrassing secret, that mass adoption finally began. So what does all of this actually tell us? Materials were never the real obstacle. Wool, cloth, and sponges existed almost everywhere. The real barrier was always cultural: shame, taboo, and restriction, imposed almost entirely by men who wrote history from the outside. Pliny's tornado-repelling menstrual blood theory tells us nothing about what Roman women actually lived through. It tells us what men feared and misunderstood. The real knowledge, what worked, what helped with pain, what materials lasted, lived inside communities of women and was rarely written down. Across nearly every culture we've covered, herbal remedies for cramps kept reappearing. Chamomile, ginger, cinnamon, fennel, plants we now know carry real physiological effects. We build museums for ancient swords and documentaries for ancient kings. But one of the most universal human experiences in history barely made it into the historical record at all. Every civilization dealt with this. Every civilization solved it, and it's long past time that story got told properly.